obviously it's great to get another deal done. But I understand this one that had its challenges. How did it come around in the first place? A little bit off your normal patch, but how did that even come around?
Yeah, well, we got the lead come through, and obviously at the time we do have now, but at the time we didn't have a local agent to go down and have a look at the property. I'm based sort of Medway, Kent, so at that point I decided to sort of head down there and just have a look at the property and do a valuation meeting, meet the owner. Um, Following the valuation of the property, we turned it around quite quick. So within sort of a couple of weeks of going down there, having a look, the property was on the market being advertised. Um, Following that, we've done sort of one or two sessions of block viewings. So I think we've done one after about a week of it being on the market, and then one sort of a week after that. Following that, we had an offer come in, essentially for the whole property, so comprising of a commercial unit and three residential units. We got a deal agreed on that. Pretty sort of smooth sailing from the start, really. However, once we got into legals, it started to get a little bit more challenging. Essentially, what the owner had told us originally was that the property would be able to be sold with vacant possession. So we got a deal agreed, and we got a buyer happy to proceed on that basis. However, as we sort of got into legals, one of the tenants actually had an agreement with the vendor, and essentially all that meant was we weren't able to sell the property with vacant possession, as we'd initially agreed with the buyer.
Yeah, it's challenging, isn't it? Because obviously I know the basis from which we took the instruction on, and essentially what happened was we took that on in good faith from all the information that we had from the client. But obviously, then when we got into the legal work and the due diligence, what we believed to be true wasn't necessarily. And don't tell me if I'm wrong. I don't think that wasn't intentional by the client, was it? I don't think there was any. He wasn't trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. I think it was he wasn't a professional investor, was he? He was just sort of a circumstantial landlord who possibly didn't understand the difference between what we believed to be true at the start and then what actually came out in the detail in the legal. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So the vendor of the property wasn't. He's not sort of a professional investor, developer. I believe he inherited the property some time ago. So it's something he wasn't actually sort of initially aware of himself. So obviously, once that came to fruition, it was something that we had to sort of explain, and then navigate through to get sort of a new sale price agreed towards the end of the deal.
It's interesting though, isn't it? Because if you have clients, which is very common in the SME market, they're inheriting properties or they're owning properties because they're going to run their business from it. It does mean that they don't necessarily understand the full detail about commercial property ownership or being a professional property investor. And so when you get into legal negotiations, it can be quite challenging because there's elements of the process that we need to educate them on. And then I think I understand that there were some personal circumstances with a vendor, which meant that sometimes he wasn't contactable, which I believe drew the process out. How did you navigate yourself around that, Tommy?
Yeah, so like I say, some of the personal circumstances with the vendor meant that they weren't always contactable, sometimes days and weeks on end. So I think in that case, it is just the case of being a patient property agent, really, understanding the vendor's situation, and just really sort of understanding where they're at and when they can essentially give us feedback. I think it was just important mainly to make sure we're educating them on the matter, because it might seem like a small detail for them, but obviously on the flip side for the buyer, not being able to get vacant possession could be quite essentially a game changer for the deal.
So how did you manage that process in terms of, you've got a client, you're instructed to sell it, you're under offer, you're in legals, but now you can't get hold of your client. Obviously, they are your client, but you are you're trying to get a deal done, and you're trying to also do the best job as far as the buyer is concerned. How did you manage that in terms of your communication with the buyer?
I think in that case, it's just being sort of honest and crystal clear when you're speaking to both sides, really. So I think obviously whenever I could speak to the vendor, it was making sure I get a a clear representation of what they want to do and how they feel about certain situations, and navigating through sort of negotiate a new price. And obviously on the flip side with the buyer, just staying in constant communication. So it's not, oh, I haven't spoken to the vendor, so I'm not going to speak to the buyer for a week or two. It's keeping them in the loop and obviously doing any sort of proactive works in the background to make sure we're pushing it through for sort of both sides' best interest.
Yeah, I think I totally support that. Like, if you're having challenges with your client due to their personal circumstances, you don't necessarily want to say exactly that to the buyer. I'm having challenges with my client because of their personal circumstances. Because if you do, you might knock their confidence on the ability for you to deliver the deal. But also, you don't want to, you want to be honest. So you have to find the balance there. And as you say, like regular communication with them about what's going on, as opposed to, well, I haven't heard from my client, so there's nothing for me to report back to the buyer. I think that's probably why you were able to get that deal done, by keeping that sort of high level communication with the buyer, giving them the comfort that yes, things might have gone a little bit quiet, but the seller is committed to the deal, which he always was, if I understand it. He was always committed to the sale.
Yeah, I think that was one of the main things, just fully understanding the vendor's situation. Even if we can't speak at every stage of the deal, I think it's just a case of being prepared. So if you know the next few steps that are coming up, make sure I'm speaking to the vendor so I know, right, listen, these are the next few steps that we're going to have to deal with. If I can't speak to you in between these times, I need to get a clear understanding of what you would like me to do and how you would like to represent in those situations.